Hello and welcome back to How to Homeschool in High School, the podcast focused on encouraging and equipping you to homeschool through high school, hosted by a high school teen. My name is Nadine Lawfer, and on today's episode, we have the honor of talking with Miss Kathy Gibbens. I first heard of Miss Gibbens' podcast about a year ago right now. It was April of 2023, and we did this Purpose Pursuit Teen Homeschool Summit, and she happened to be one of the speakers on this summit, and I absolutely loved what she had to say, specifically targeting the power of critical thinking in the life of the high school student, and the amazing effects it has whenever you start thinking critically about different subjects, about what information is being put in front of your eyes, because there is no limit to the amount of information we have as teenagers these days, and the amount of propaganda we're exposed to, the amount of bad thinking we're exposed to is exponentially growing daily. So it is time we start fighting back, and the way we can do that is by learning to think critically about the world around us. So this is a very, very important topic. We cover a lot of things, from what exactly is a logical fallacy to what are the most common logical fallacies that we are exposed to as teenagers, and then how to fight them, and what it means to be rooted in truth. So we cover a lot of good things. This is great for parents to listen to, and teens especially. I think it is important for us to hear these things. So without further ado, let's dive into this episode. Hello and welcome to How to Homeschool in High School. Thank you so much for being with us today, Miss Gibbens. I absolutely love your podcast and your message, so I'm so excited to talk with you today.
That's awesome. Thank you, Nadine. I'm super excited to be here. I love what you're doing, and it is an honor to be on your show.
Oh, thank you so much. So I always start with the same question, which I'm really interested to hear. How did you guys get started with homeschooling, and how did that lead to the creation of your podcast?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my husband and I have been entrepreneurs for 20 plus years, probably, well, most of our married lives, about 25 years. And so when we had our daughter, we knew we wanted to be able to teach her how to think outside the box. We didn't just want to teach her, the typical thing when, well, you might not know, but typically for those of us who go through regular school, it's this whole idea of you go to school, you get a good education, you get a good job, and someday you're going to make it, right? And as entrepreneurs, we just looked at the world a little differently, and we said, no, education just doesn't happen at school. Like, you should be pursuing an education your entire life, even when you're out of school. It's just learning. Like, you should have a mindset and a culture of learning in your home and for yourself. And so homeschooling was just a really good fit. It fit in with our lifestyle, it fit in with our values, and it has been a fantastic option for our family. Our daughter we have just one, and she is now 16. She's a junior in high school, and we have homeschooled the whole way through.
That's wonderful. I love that so much, because it is like it's a completely different mindset to approach school. That a lot of us, like my mom, she just kind of fell into it. But I can see you being an entrepreneur, kind of seeing it already, which is really cool. Really cool perspective.
So to answer, I didn't answer the second part of your question. So how did that lead to me starting my podcast? So when my daughter was in 7th grade, it was the school year of 2019-2020, which is the infamous school year when the pandemic happened, right? And the whole world shuts down because of COVID, all that stuff. Well, that second semester, she was reading as part of her curriculum a book called Fallacy Detective, where it teaches informal logic. It teaches logical fallacies. And I had never learned about logical fallacies. I didn't have logic in high school. I went to a good private Christian school, right? That was kind of how I was educated, but I didn't learn any of this stuff. And the kids loved it. I was like, this is amazing. And then we had the whole pandemic happened, and fact checkers online. And then we roll into the presidential election, right? And the campaigns and all that happened in 2020. And what I observed of these kids who had learned even just a little bit about critical thinking and logical fallacies is they were able to recognize them immediately. And so they were not getting fooled by the messages that they were seeing, by the things that they were hearing, by the memes that were up. They were like, well, that's an ad hominem, and that was the straw man fallacy. And watching a presidential debate with kids who've been trained a little bit in critical thinking is crazy because they recognize it immediately. And I thought, oh my goodness, our country would not be in the place that it's in right now if more people just had this simple skill. And recognizing logical fallacies is actually really fun. Like middle school is such a fun time to learn it, because in middle school, you're wanting to argue, you're starting to argue, you're wanting to, hash things out. And so I'm of the mind, like, look, okay, if kids want to argue, let's teach them how to do it right. Let's teach them how to do it really well, like hone this skill. It's the perfect time. And they loved learning about the fallacies. And so I said, okay, I got this. I can start a podcast and I can teach these. So I teach every episode a different logical fallacy and critical thinking, short little fun episodes. It's really just meant for parents and kids to listen together in the car. Most of them are less than 10 minutes and learn something and have a conversation. Be like, hey, have you ever seen that fallacy? Have you ever used that fallacy? Because we all do it. So it's been super fun.
That's wonderful. I love that story so much because I feel like it embodies the spirit of homeschooling so much, because when we don't see something, we usually have to go out and make it ourselves. So I love that you saw the need for more, and not only just for students, but also for parents to learn alongside the students, which is so awesome. And what else? Has there been what has the response been to the podcast? Has it mostly been teen or students that are listening to it, or parents as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say the majority of my listeners are families that they listen together. They do. They'll turn it on. The parents will turn it on in the car and they'll listen to it together. So, and I have some that are just adults that just enjoy listening because they like learning. I've got a few where it's just the kids that they enjoy listening, but I would say predominantly it's parents and their kids, and they listen together, and it just makes it super fun.
That is super fun. And on the Fallacy Detective, we also did Fallacy Detective in, I think I was 7th or 6th grade when we did that. And it was so fun because now when my parents were speaking, I would point out things that they were doing. And
exactly.
You just have such an awareness of the way that you are speaking as well as the way that other people are speaking. And it really makes you think before you say something. Like, is this actually true, or is this the way that I'm supposed to be saying my point? It's just a nice communication skill to have.
100%. And it keeps you from being fooled. It keeps you from being swayed and manipulated by somebody who's saying something that sounds really good or sounds convincing, but it just might not be. It might not be true.
And especially, you mentioned you use memes a lot on Instagram and everything. And I love that because it's so practical, and because the internet is so full of all this different information. So being able to kind of understand what people are trying to make you feel, or where they're trying to make you think differently. So that's really cool.
Absolutely. I think it's a fun way to learn.
So we did Fallacy Detective a few years ago, but honestly, since then, logic has not been a huge part of my homeschooling. So I'm trying to fix that this year and learn some more logic. But could you just explain what a logical fallacy is and what critical thinking is?
Yes, absolutely. Great question. And so let me give you a couple definitions. I think this will be really helpful. So critical thinking is just the ability. These are my simple definitions. Okay. I don't give school definitions of things. This is just how I describe it. Critical thinking is just the ability to think well and to think rightly about something and to discern truth from error. So a fallacy, or a logical fallacy. So fallacy is just a mistake. Logical has to do with thinking. So a logical fallacy, simply put, is an error in thinking. It's just somebody who has made an error in their thinking. And there's a lot of them. In Fallacy Detective, you get introduced to about 30-ish or so. There's over 300 different named logical fallacies. Is that crazy or what? It's wow, there's a lot of ways that we can think wrongly about something. So that's a good definition to have. And another definition that I always like to use is propaganda, because I talk a lot about propaganda in different episodes on my podcast as well, because it kind of falls under the same category when you can recognize it. Once you know about it, you're able to recognize it, and now it doesn't work on you anymore. But propaganda are different tactics that are used to manipulate people mentally and emotionally. And we always think of propaganda as, being used in war or being used here and there, but it happens around us all the time. Advertisements and promotions and all kinds of stuff. It shows up in a lot of different places. And the last definition that I want to give is called cognitive bias or mental bias. So cognitive or mental, just having to do with our brain and how we think. And bias is a way that we kind of lean. So a cognitive bias is a limitation in our ability to think objectively. Everybody likes to say, "Oh, I can think objectively. I'm an objective thinker." No, we're not. We are not innately objective thinkers because we all have these biases. We have a certain way that we see the world, and it limits our ability to think well. And in season 2 of my podcast, I'm going to start teaching the cognitive biases so people can start recognizing, but we have to realize that we all have them. For instance, I'm a wife, I'm a mom, I'm a homeschooling mom. All those things affect the way I view the world. I can't not view the world as a woman because that's what I am. I can't not view the world as a mother because I'm a mother. So there's certain things that we all have that are going to limit our ability to be objective about the world that we see. But if we can recognize our biases, if we can recognize those of other people, now we can say, okay, well, I might be a little biased or I might be struggling to see things objectively here. Let me dig in a little more and just ask some more questions and see if I can get a little more insight on this. So it's really interesting, the different way, understanding the way our brain works and the way that messages are given to us. And so that we can really parse them down and try to discover what is actually true.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's awesome. I think one thing that stood out to me was the fact that you're not only learning about other people and what they're trying to say to you, but you're also learning about how you're accepting that. That's a cool part of logic that I didn't really think about before. So that's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Good observation. Yeah.
And then in episode 3 of your podcast, I loved the history of the American school system, which I didn't really know before. I knew a little bit about it, but the history and like Prussia, that was all new. So I loved that episode so much. But why is it so important that for the homeschool community to revive critical thinking in education?
Yeah, so it got taken. I think it's really important. And we do talk about this in episode 3 of the podcast. So go listen to it. But the bottom line is that the education system that we use now here in America and pretty much in most places around the world was designed specifically to spit out at the end, by the time people graduate, people who are doers and who are really good at following orders, not necessarily people who are thinkers and can critically think. It was actually designed to create soldiers who would not question any orders that were given to them. They just needed to be able to take an order, salute and execute and do the thing. It was designed to turn out factory workers who wouldn't think, they would just do whatever they were told to do. And so we have to realize that the whole system that we were typically educated in, right? You've got homeschoolers here. So a lot of times homeschoolers are doing things differently, but it was all designed to spit out workers who did not think. And then critical thinking itself, logic as a topic, as a subject, was removed in the 50s because it was not deemed to be socially needed. It wasn't socially important. And so they took it out. It's not like it was banned. There's a few schools that teach it, but typically you have to go into philosophy in college and start following a philosophy track to even get any logic in your education, unless you've got a school that does it as a club or, there's a few out there that have it. So it's really important for us to realize that if you didn't get it, you have the responsibility to learn it. Like, you still need to learn this skill. Just because I didn't have home ec when I went to school doesn't mean I don't need to know how to cook, right? So it's still a really important skill to use, because we will all be subject to manipulation. We'll all be subject to bad thinking if we aren't able to recognize it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love that it was our responsibility to kind of get educated, because sometimes I feel like I hear a lot of people saying, well, I didn't learn that in school, but it's also part of the homeschooling mindset that I love, is that education is rightfully in our possession. So I love that perspective, that it's our responsibility also to be aware of how we're being affected by what other people are saying and to learn how to think critically. So 100%, I love that so much.
Yep.
And then, so I found this really interesting. I listened to your most recent interview on, I forgot, refining rhetoric. I think that's the name.
Oh yeah, Robert Borton's. Yep.
Yeah. So I loved, you guys talked a lot about common fallacies that you see a lot of people believing, but I wondered if you have any particular ones that you see a lot of young people, teens, believing.
Man, one of the biggest ones, there's a couple. There's a couple. One of the biggest ones that is really prevalent right now is an appeal to emotion. So an appeal to emotion is when somebody just tries to make you feel a certain way to get you to do or believe something, rather than providing a good reason or a good argument for why you should do or believe that thing. So an appeal to emotion, you can put in any emotion. I could do things to make you feel guilty. If I can make you feel guilty, then I can get you to do different things. Or an appeal to pity. This is another big one. If you've ever seen the TV commercials for the dogs, right? The poor dogs in the shelter, and the Arms of the Angels is playing in the background, and it's all kind of gray and sad. They find the saddest dog that they can find. Everything about that commercial is designed to make you feel pity, so that you will send money, or so that you will somehow take action for these abandoned dogs. That's an appeal to pity. And the reason they do these appeals to emotion is because emotion is a very strong driver. If I can make you feel afraid, I mean, just look at all the things that happened during COVID, all the appeals to fear. You're going to kill grandma, right? All these different things that happen, and the messages that we were told, those are appeals to emotion. You don't have to give any good reason. If I can make you angry, I can get people out there that are going to go and loot and burn down buildings. If I can get you angry enough, or if I can get, look at the terrible things that have happened. If I can get you to hate a certain people group, then I can be Hitler and get an entire nation to turn against the Jews. So there's so many different appeals to our emotions that we have to watch out for. And we have to say, okay, so this person wants me angry. Why? Why do they want me angry? What's the agenda? Okay, is that really true? And that's why I always end every episode with asking one simple question: is that really true? Before you go down the road that somebody's trying to take you on, you have to discern if it's even true or a real thing. So that's a big one. Another really big one that's very prevalent in society today that your generation is having to face is relativism. It's the fallacy of relativism. Relativism says that you can kind of make up your own truth, and everything is relative. Everything is subjective. There's no objective truth. So I can have a truth, and you can have a truth, and they could be in total opposition to each other, but they're both still true. And we have to accept both of them as true. Well, guess what? No, it's not. That's not true. That is the relativistic fallacy. And because there's three laws of logic, and one of them says if something is true, the opposite cannot also both be true. They can't both be true. And if somebody doesn't have that basic understanding of what truth is and what truth isn't, now society has gone down a whole nother road where there is no truth. And it's almost hate speech if you try to say, no, this is actually true, or this is not true. And at that point, anything is true and nothing is true all at the same time, right? When you are operating in relativism like that. So those are just a few of the big ones that I see your generation facing right now.
Yeah, I've definitely confronted those at multiple different times, and the truth is relative on that. That's been hard to kind of navigate because everyone's I guess it's kind of both of them, like they're emotionally attached to that idea as well, and then you have both of them to deal with. So is there any way that we can work to overcome those?
Yeah, it just starts by asking the question, okay, what is really true here, right? What is really true? And if you can start there and just start asking some questions, well, how do they know? Where are they getting that from? What is their source for that? What are they turning to for why this is true? What is the real argument that's happening here? Just start asking a few questions. How do you know? Who says, right? You can dig into all these things, because that's exactly the people who are giving the messages. That's what they're hoping you won't do. They're hoping you won't stop and ask any questions, that you'll just accept what they're saying, that you'll ride the emotional roller coaster, whatever. So if you can just pause and just ask a few questions, dig in a little bit, that alone will set you apart and enable you to think really well about what they're saying. What are they actually saying? Try to just dig down to, okay, so I see this little meme and it looks good and it makes me feel guilty, so it must be true. Okay, but is it? Is it really true? Right? Well, dig in a little bit. What's truth? How do we know? Where can we go to find out what might be true? And just start there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really good. And spending time in truth, I think, is something like reading the word every day, just being in God's word and the truth that also, I feel like, makes a difference whenever you're combating the last. Mm-hmm.
It does make a difference, because there has to be a standard. You have to have a standard to say, well, how do we know what's true? How do we know And that's ultimately what we go back to. And that's why you can never be afraid to dig into something, because sometimes people want to avoid different subjects. Okay, well, let's not talk about this, or let's not talk about that, because they're afraid of what they might find. Well, we never have to be afraid of it, because we're never going to find out some truth that's going to violate God's word. We're never going to find some truth that's going to be in contradiction to scripture, because that is truth. It's ultimately going to come back. So we can confidently say, okay, well, let's dive in and let's just look at this, because we can ultimately know that as we seek truth, it will always lead in alignment with what we find in scripture.
And do you think that's part of the reason why they have removed the logic and the critical thinking from the schools, is just because we don't really have that basis of truth underlined that we used to, not as much anymore?
I think that's probably part of it. I absolutely do. And I think the other part of it is that a people who cannot think for themselves are very easy to control and manipulate. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, if you're somebody who is seeking power, if you're seeking control over people, do you want them to have the ability to think for themselves, or do you just want them? No, it's easier and faster to get what you want if they just do what you say. And so let's take the skill of thinking out. And now people are more prone to just be led, even by, this is how we end up being led by evil people, is because people haven't stopped to think, no, that's not true, and I'm not doing that. And we have to have that ability.
And I don't think social media has been very helpful in that sense, because it does kind of have this passive sort of thing to it. You don't really think about what you're watching as much as I should probably think about these things. So right. I don't know. Yes. I feel like that kind of plays in a little too.
You have to have discernment. And I think here's if you're on social media, a really good way to approach it is you don't want to be consuming, right? So many people with social media, they just scroll and they consume. Well, scroll and be critical, right? So rather than consume, and just, is that true? Is that true? Is that true? This is how I do it. As I look through social media, I'm on alert to see what is true. Because guess what? Say if it comes to politics, both sides of the aisle, including the one that I would more closely align with, commit fallacies, right? They both do. And they both will make appeals to emotion. They both will be manipulative. And so we have to be aware of that. I have seen things in different churches, even where there has been manipulation and, appeals to emotion. And it's like, no, we don't need that. If we're standing on the truth, we shouldn't have to go toward that. So it's really good just to be smartly suspicious. I don't know, and just, not that we have to be suspicious about everything, but we do have to always, be a little bit, okay, let me just think about that and analyze if that's true or not.
Mm-hmm. I saw this one time, scroll mindfully, like just be aware of what you're doing. I liked that.
Excellent. That's a great phrase. Scroll mindfully. Yes.
And then you also mentioned on your podcast that critical thinking skills can improve your mental health. I was wondering why that might be the case.
Yes. So I noticed that again during the pandemic. I noticed that these kids in my class who had even just learned a little bit of critical thinking skills, they went through that pandemic time so much better than their peers who did not. Because think about it, when you're constantly getting emotionally manipulated, you're riding an emotional roller coaster. You're angry, you're sad, you're up, you're down, you're all riled up about this and you're sad about this. Like, it is exhausting. It's exhausting to play the ping pong with the messages that we're being told. And so when you can just listen to somebody and parse it and not ride the emotional roller coaster, it just evens things out. You're not getting fooled. You're not getting taken. You're not having to be like, oh man, this is so terrible. I hate them and they hate me, all these things. So I actually wrote down reasons why I think good thinking skills can change the world. And I'll give you a couple of them. Okay. Why I think so. Number one, things got so much clearer for me after I had the language and the skills of good thinking. Because when you have the language, because it's one thing to say, something about that doesn't seem right. It's another thing to say, oh, they used equivocation. They mixed up they change the meaning of that word halfway through the argument. You see? So just having the language helped me define it, helped me to pick out exactly what was wrong with the argument. Number two, once you learn to reason well, you will never be mentally or emotionally manipulated again by advertisements, by politicians, by those who stand to reason from manipulating you, because you'll be able to recognize, oh, I see what they're doing. They're doing good cop, bad cop. Oh, that was the foot in the door tactic. And you have words for it now. You have language for what they're doing. Number three, society is better when more people can think and reason well. Number four, most of us, we're not taught these skills in school, so we have to learn them somewhere. And that, again, is why I started my podcast. I just want it to be super simple and easy and fun for people to do it. Number five, being able to spot bad reasoning and flawed logic is almost a superpower in a world when most people can't do it. It's almost like you see the world differently because most people are getting caught up or they're getting fooled by it. And you don't have to do that. You can be like, no, I'm opting out of that because that's ridiculous. Which leads to number six, you won't get fooled by foolishness. And goodness knows there is no shortage of foolishness out there. Number seven, you will be more persuasive when you talk about the things you care about. Now, this is important because if you have a message that you're bringing to the world, you want to be effective, right? You want to be effective. And that's what most people tend to, so they'll appeal to emotion or they'll use some of these other tactics to try to be effective. But if you can use good thinking when you present your ideas, you have a much higher chance of getting your ideas across in a way that people can make sense and you can truly get people to see see and understand what you're saying. Number eight, it improves mental and emotional health for the reasons that I told you, which right now is reaching epidemic levels in society. I mean, your generation is struggling with anxiety and depression and all these things in a way that we have never seen before. And I think this is one of the big reasons is because if you don't know how to take every thought captive, right? Because that's what critical thinking is. It's a version of taking every thought captive and saying, is that true? And if it is true, we're going to act on truth. If it's not, we're not going to do it. You get swayed all over the place. You get tossed and thrown. And truth is grounding. Truth is very grounding. And so when you can be grounded in some way, you're not going to be as tumbled by anxiety. You're not going to, the unknown, if the truth changes every single day, like it does in society and like it does in relativism, how can you ever be stable? How can you ever be grounded? You can't be. But when you can have truth and you can know it, it's very stabilizing, and that helps mental and emotional health for sure. It improves your relationships. It makes you impervious to being used, and it's just fun. So anyways, that's just a few of the reasons that I wrote down for why I think critical thinking is so important.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. I love the imagery of being like, I forget which verse it is from, the house built on the rock or the house built on the truth versus the house built on the sand. It's just so exhausting to constantly be changing what's true and what's not true. And I can't imagine, like, I'm very blessed with the home that I have and with God's word and everything being so grounding, but I can't imagine for a majority of the teens in the world right now, like we're just, it's so hard to navigate this ever-changing world. And so I really love all those ideas.
Yes, you are spot on.
And then I also wanted to sometimes thinking can be hard. I know when I'm scrolling, I just kind of want to scroll and not really think about anything that I'm doing. Or if I'm listening to something, I'll just kind of accept what they're saying and not really add my part into. So what can you say to parents and teachers who want to instill a love of critical thinking into their students? Is there anything that they can do?
The number one tool that we have for good thinking is just asking questions. If you can get good at asking good questions about the things that you're seeing, that is going to help thinking. Now, like you said, thinking, I always say this, thinking is the hardest work you'll ever do, which is why so few people do it, right? Especially in a society today that's not been taught to be thinking. It's hard work. So parents could do is just ask the question, right? So, okay, well, what are they saying there? Right? You see that billboard? What are they saying? Or is that really true? These are some of the questions that you can ask and have start a conversation. Well, how do you know that's true? Right? If it's not true, what is the truth? And just ask some of these questions. And that is the best way to do it. And just try to have a conversation about it.
Yeah, and it got me thinking because I know a lot of people struggle with learning math, and I always equated math a lot with logic and reasoning and kind of working through an argument in a way that is irrefutable, just like
Yes.
this is exactly how I got there. And that involves a lot of thinking too, so I can kind of see the
Yes.
parallels between some of those things. But that's, yeah, everything's connected, which I love.
It is. It is connected.
Yeah. So I also wanted to know, do you have any advice for homeschool high schoolers?
Absolutely. The biggest thing that I would want you to know, and this is going to come from the critical thinking lady, right? Like, this is what I talk about, and this is what I
Mm-hmm.
do, is I want you to know that there is a truth and you can know it.
Mm.
And that's very simple to say, but it's also very profound in a world that's telling you there is no truth and that the truth is changing all the time. Obviously, I'm a Christian. I believe that the truth comes from the word of God, and that's how we can know that. And we can know it. But just having, I don't know if you've ever read the book, Live Not by Lies. So there's a book, Rod Dreher wrote a book, Live Not by Lies. And what he did is he interviewed a bunch of people who had survived communism in different countries, and they had lived through it and survived, and talked about what they did and how did they stand, how did they eventually, because eventually communism always fails. It has to. It's evil, and it will have to fail. But in the meantime, a lot of people get very hurt by, when they live in a communist country. And there's a gentleman, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and he wrote a lot. He lived through communist regimes. And he says the simplest thing that you can do to stand for truth is to refuse to take part in the lie. Live not by lies, right? And so the smallest things, that the base point is to be able to recognize truth, number one, and then refuse to have anything to do with the lie, because the less power we give the lie, the less power it has. And that's where it starts. We have to give the power and the attention to the things that are true and take it away from things that are false. Your generation, there's no shortage of cray-cray out there. There's no shortage of lies being told. And so we have to have a generation that says, no, thanks. That's not true. And I'm not entertaining this. I'm not going to be a part of this. I am not going to continue this lie or continue this falsehood, because this is the truth and we can know the truth. So that would be one of the simplest things that I could say is we need a culture. We need a generation who are just going to say, no, that's not true. And we're not doing that.
Yeah, and that can kind of be hard sometimes, especially because it's against the current, which I like about homeschoolers because we're already against the current. So that's just a great way to kind of already start that foundation of being someone who's okay with saying no to different lies that everyone else is believing.
Yes, and it's easy for me to say, right? This is one of those things that's very easy to say, very hard to do. And here's the thing, the truth is going to cost you something. It just is. And it's okay. It's okay, right? We have to realize that as Christians, we are living in a time when it's going to cost us something to stand for truth. But that should bring us joy, right? That should bring us joy, not fear. I think we tend to get fearful. Oh no, it could cost me a relationship. It could cost me, these people looking down on me. It could cost me my job, right? There's been people who have lost their job because they have refused to they've chosen to live not by the lie. They have refused to go with the lie and they've stood for the truth. It's going to cost you something, but goodness, what's the cost if you go along with the lie? What's the cost for refusing to stand with the truth? Right? That's a cost for eternity, potentially. So we just have to weigh that, and we have to say, okay, this could cost me something. This isn't going to come for nothing, but it's worth it, but it's right, but it needs to be done. And this is how we do it.
I love that so much. And you're not alone in that, because we all kind of, whenever we stand together, I feel like it makes us all more confident if we have other people doing it as well. But sometimes you have to do it alone.
Yes,
which is
exactly.
Not always easy either.
Yes. And this is why we have to encourage each other. If we see somebody else standing for truth, we need to support them.
Yeah.
Even if it's just with a like or a comment or something like that, we have to support the truth when we see somebody standing.
And I think it also comes down to your priorities, which is something I've been thinking about too. Like, do we prioritize something over speaking the truth or standing with the truth? Whether that's the fear of man or just, don't want to lose a relationship or something. It's always kind of where my priorities lined up, and is it the correct order? Something that, you have to do some thinking to yourself for all of that.
Yeah.
Involves thinking.
Yes. And we have to really face what the Bible calls fear of man, right? Who am I going to fear? Am I going to fear God, or am I going to fear man? Am I going to be more concerned about what people think of me versus what God thinks of me? And it's really interesting. It's one of the things that I'm kind of studying this year, is the difference in what the Bible has to say about the fear of man versus the fear of God. And because we all struggle with it, right? That's not something that's unique to your generation. Everybody struggles with this. And so it's just a really important thing to say, okay, this might be how it is, but I got this. I can do this.
And when sometimes I'll post things about homeschooling, and I'll get like some negative comments on it because it is going against, the normal narrative. But I also see all these other homeschoolers come out, and I like when people take a stand. Sometimes you just see everyone kind of come out also with the same viewpoint, that sometimes it just takes the first person to do that, which is not always the easy thing to do either. But yeah, standing is also important. Standing with other people.
Yep.
So I was also wondering, for parents and students who want to go a little deeper into the study of critical thinking and logic, is there any resources you have that could help, books or book recommendations or curriculum recommendations? Sorry.
Yeah. So The Fallacy Detective is a really fun one. We've talked about that one already. It's a fun book. It's really great for middle school. I think it's a really great one. Master Books always has, I think, also, if you wanted a whole curriculum workbook, like it's a workbook, it's called, I think it's Introduction to Logic. That's a really good one for people who want a workbook that they can go through and really learn. I think that's an excellent one. If you just want something to turn on and listen to in the car, check out my podcast. Those would be the places to start.
Yeah. Have you ever heard anything about the Memorial Press Intro to Logic? I think that's...
Yes, I think that, if I remember correctly, we have used that one. They have, or maybe I'm thinking of Veritas Press. I would have to look at it and see, but we've done the Traditional Logic 1, Traditional Logic 2. That's formal logic. Fallacies are considered to be informal logic. So yeah. So if you're looking for more about the fallacies, you want to look for a resource on informal logic.
Okay, that's good to know. I had no idea that there were different types. That's awesome. Yeah, my sister is currently working through that. And the person that's leading it was, she did CC for a while. So I don't know if that was something that CC does too.
Very well could be. Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. And then finally I had, how can listeners connect with you? So you mentioned your podcast. Is there anywhere else?
Yes, podcast, Instagram, Filter It Through a Brain Cell, and my website is filteritthroughbraincell.com. I do have a free quiz. So it is a free quiz, and yes, it's all memes. So there's 10 different memes on there that you can look at and see if you can figure out which fallacy is being committed in each of the memes. So for that, just go to filteritthroughbraincell.com/quiz, and you can take it there. It's super fun.
I have to try that out. I think I saw it. I have to finish it. So that's awesome.
Yeah, you'll have to go do it.
Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today and for sharing everything you talked about. And I'll definitely link everything that we talked about in the show notes. So podcast, even the curriculum resources, everything in the show notes. So you guys can go check that out there. So thank you again so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Nadine. Keep doing what you're doing. This is awesome.
So that is it for episode number 39 of How to Homeschool in High School. And I just want to take a moment and thank Ms. Gibbens for not only just being on the podcast today, but also taking the initiative to start her podcast and fill that need in our community, especially as homeschoolers, to provide more encouragement and more information surrounding the topic of critical thinking. So we are so blessed by her podcast and what she's doing. I hope she continues to do it, and that you guys go check out her podcast, because I linked it in the show notes. Go support her and listen to her episodes. You will surely learn something really valuable and improve your communication skills and also your mental health. So that's pretty amazing that critical thinking has the power to do all of these things. So with that, I also wanted to mention for the next episode, number 40, we are releasing the live interviews I did at Great Homeschool Conventions last week. So if you guys are new listeners from Great Homeschool Conventions, first of all, welcome. And secondly, definitely stay tuned for next episode, because you might be featured on it. And I had just so much fun going back and re-listening to all these interviews. There were so many wise homeschoolers, so many excited homeschoolers. It was just, I enjoyed talking with you guys, hearing your concerns, hearing your questions, and also your enthusiasm for homeschooling. Really, truly inspired me, and I hope this episode will inspire you as well. So definitely stay tuned for that episode. Again, big thanks to Miss Kathy Gibbens from Filtered Through Brain Cell Podcast for being on the show today. And as always, I hope you guys continue to stay fearlessly different.